Hello there, welcome to the channel. This is Nerd.World Films. Today I am continuing my series of discussions on the Star Trek movies. Now, to be clear, these are not film reviews per se. I don't really do those. They're just a discussion of just what I think of a particular film and what you think of it. And I'm just putting it out there. Now, as I'm a huge Star Trek fan, I've been doing all the Star Trek movies, and I've finally come to Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, the last one of the original series true movies, before you get Generations, which was the passing of the torch film between the two generations. Literally, pun intended. I'm so sorry. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below if you're liking the channel, and please check out all the other videos I've done so far, both of other Nerd Talks and of the other Star Trek movies Nerd Talks. Plus there's a whole plethora of different types of videos on this channel and on my two other channels, Nerd.World and Nerd.World History, that are linked down below if you want to check those out. But now, let's get started on Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. One quick thing to insert here, if you want to find all of my videos, they are all actually hashtagged and linked through Facebook and through Instagram. If you type into Google or directly into YouTube, Nerd World Empire, all one word, it'll bring up all of my videos and my channels, just for ease of locating them all, just in case you're interested. Now, Star Trek VI begins on the bridge of the USS Excelsior as Captain Sulu treats himself to a well-earned cup of tea when they are rudely interrupted by a massive shockwave originating from within the Klingon Empire and a distress signal from the moon of Praxis, the Klingon key energy producing facility, basically where the Klingons mine all their dilithium or whatever for use in their reactors across the Empire. And the Excelsior survives the explosion and is told not to enter the Klingon Empire. This is then reported to the Federation, who then learn that the Klingon Empire is now on its knees. And this is a setup for what is one of the best of the original series movies. A film that is very well put together, very well cast, very well acted, and it shows that the people who made this film knew what they were doing. So, let's move on to the next bit of this magnificently made film. After these events, the Federation will open up negotiations with the Klingon Empire about disarmament and peace. The Klingons are no longer able to afford the Cold War. A bit like the collapse of the Soviet Union, which this film could be taken as a paradigm for, the Klingon Empire was no longer economically viable to just carry on with this state of affairs they have been with the Federation all this time. And luckily for the Federation, Gorkon is a more reasonable Klingon Chancellor. Now, he's willing to listen, he's willing to talk, but there are elements, it's obvious, on both sides that are not as willing to talk peace, including Kirk himself. Now, Spock has been handling some of the negotiations, and he recommends Kirk to be the escort aboard the USS Enterprise of the Klingon ship, the IKS Kronos 1, as it comes into Federation space. He'll escort and make sure it gets there safely. When they do this, they invite Gorkon and all of his cronies aboard the Enterprise for a state dinner, which the Klingons are unusually willing to do, probably trying to smush up to the Federation, as Klingons like Gark and other such things that are still alive, and often have pointed out they don't really like human food. But these Klingons, they make a show of it. They display table manners, and you are introduced to Christopher Plummer's wonderful take on a Klingon general, General Chang, a literal Shakespearean villain, a Klingon that likes Shakespeare. Tak ba, tak bek. Believe me, that's the only time I'm going to try Klingon, which is to be or not to be in Klingon, I think. Now, he is a wonderful villain and antagonist for this movie, and then basically after they return to their ship, they are hit by photon torpedoes seemingly from the Enterprise, and then two humans, or at least two people wearing Starfleet uniforms, beam aboard the ship, kill loads of the Klingons, and assassinate the Chancellor. Chang vows revenge and is about to open fire on the Enterprise when the Enterprise surrenders. Kirk and McCoy beam over to attempt to save the man, while Spock, aboard the ship, begins to ponder exactly why, or who, more accurately, attacked the Klingon ship. and him and the crew begin to look into it, and he comes to the conclusion, as it's Spock and he's fucking awesome, that they didn't shoot the torpedo, so someone else did. Scotty visually accounts for every torpedo aboard the ship, but they do eventually learn that it was crew members from the Enterprise that did the assassination. While all this is happening, Kirk and McCoy, who've been arrested, transported back to Kronos for trial, are defended by Counselor Worf, who we learn, I think in continuity, is technically the grandfather of Worf, and therefore he is the father of Moog, so that would make Moog the son of Worf and Worf the son of Moog. Right, anyway. He badly defends Kirk and McCoy, and they end up going to Rurapente rather than simply being executed, which under Klingon law is what they normally would have done, but he had a good enough argument that they were ultimately just sentenced to a slow death on Rurapente instead. While all this again is happening, the Enterprise is feigning injury. It's pretending its warp drive isn't working so it can't come home, and the talks at Khitomer are continuing, and there's lots of little bits going on in the background. Kirk and McCoy get into fights in the prison. They encounter a woman who turns out to be a Comaloid, which are a race of shapeshifters we'll never see or hear from again, who I always think kind of reminded me of the Changelings. It's like they seem to be very advanced shapeshifters, but anyway. All of these little moving parts are going on, and as I said, Spock realizes that someone aboard the ship is a traitor, and then someone assassinates the assassins when they figure out who the assassins were. So the assassin assassinated the assassins. This character, actually the one who it turns out to be, the young Vulcan woman, was originally meant to be Savick. This was intended to show the sort of the depths of how ill feelings there were by some people within the Federation, possibly because of the death of David Marcus in front of her, who died at the hands of renegade Klingons. They simply wanted to sustain the hostilities. Kirk, in the meantime, was learning a lesson that not all Klingons are evil, that Gorkon and his daughter are actually honourable and decent people, not murderers like Krug, who killed his son for no reason. But Kirk will probably never have a good opinion of Klingons, but at least he came to the realization of his own intolerance through the events of this movie. Now all these, as I said, all these different moving parts are still taking place, and there turns out there is another assassination. They realize that there are people on both sides. It's not just Klingons, it's Federation as well. They learn that Chang has a bird of prey with a prototype cloaking device that allows the ship to fire its torpedoes while cloaked, although it can't use any of its other systems like shields or its disruptors, only its torpedoes. Probably because torpedoes don't require additional energy really to fire aside from the firing mechanism and the antimatter you stick in them to give them their yield. Disruptors on the other end are directed energy, requiring direct power from the same system as powering their cloak, so I imagine that's why they don't work. The vessel, unfortunately, was never used against the Klingon Empire's true enemies, only by these conspirators. The vessel, as the Klingons as we know, were divided into different houses. It was likely developed by either Chang's own house or one of the supporting members of the High Council who were supporting his moves. Now, this ultimately culminates in them learning that there's going to be another assassination attempt, but this time it's going to be the Federation president who is killed, who was played by Kurtwood Smith in this film, and would later go on to play Anarax, who I am definitely going to do a profile of at some point, because not only is Kurtwood Smith awesome, but Anarax was probably one of the best villains in Star Trek as well. He's maybe not the most fleshed out ever, but I'm getting off topic, but he was good. Anyway, he's played by Kurtwood Smith, and you've got, again, Kirk now out of the prison. He's been broke out, he's managed to escape with the help of that Comaloid and some Klingon conspirators who were going to kill them, but the Enterprise has snuck through Klingon lines. It's pretended to be a Klingon ship by turning off its transponder and talking to everyone in Klingon. They managed to get to Rurapente. He's outside the transport perimeter. The Klingon guards are going to kill him because they want to make a show that he tried to escape and they could now kill him. They beam him up to the Enterprise before, unfortunately, they could tell him who's behind everything. And then they zip to Khitomer to stop whoever it is that's going to assassinate the Chancellor. But that's when they run into Chang on his bird of prey and all of his Shakespeare quotes. And They end up in a big fight, and all the time Sulu, he's rushing on the Excelsior to come and help his former captain and his comrades aboard the Enterprise and save the Federation and the Klingon Empire from going to war with one another or continuing this pointless Cold War that's been sustained for the last 100 years. Now, both vessels take a beating from Chang's bird of prey simply because they can't hit it, but eventually Spock hits on the notion of gas. Spock has gas, and he uses that, and he realises that, you know what, it's moving around, it's using gas, it's expelling fuel like any other ship, and we can track that. The sensors might not be good enough to use it as a target lock, but if we modify the tracking systems on the torpedo itself, it can simply follow it, like following a trail of breadcrumbs through space, which is what they do. And him and McCoy perform surgery as they put it on a torpedo, removing a lot of the other systems, modifying it so that it will track a specific signature of the decay of the Klingon fuel system from their impulse engines, and they fire it. And once it hits its target, once it lands, both the Excelsior and the Enterprise just let loose with a barrage of torpedoes, as the Enterprise, as I've said before, doesn't fire its phasers in anything except Star Trek II, and they obliterate the ship. Then they've got to beam down to the surface and find the assassin before he or she has a chance to kill the President. And Admiral Cartwright, who they have since learned from Spock's mind meld, is the one behind it this time. They get Sulu and Scran, they get him. It's like, where's the assassin? And they see him. He's up on the sort of on the balcony, stereotypically, about to shoot the President, but then he's knocked through and he lands on the ground dead. And it turns out he's actually wearing a Klingon mask, which I believe in the original theatrical cut he wasn't. It was just a Klingon, but if you watch the extended version with the deleted scenes put in, he's wearing prosthetics, and it's actually a Starfleet colonel who was again played by the late René Auberjonois, who's also in this film as playing a human, of course, who's playing a Starfleet colonel who's also part of the conspiracy and doesn't want alliance or peace with the Klingons for his own whatever personal reasons, career, hatred, bigotry, who knows. And then they're saved. There's this lovely moment with the new Klingon Chancellor, and everybody's happy, and eventually the Khitomer Treaty is signed, and it sustains all the way up to the Dominion War until Chancellor Gowron rips it up and then eventually reaffirms it after Sisko convinces him that tearing it up in the first place was a bad idea, and that's just what the enemy wanted them to do, divide and conquer. Dominion Tactic 101. But it all started here. Kirk overcomes his intolerances. The Federation learns a valuable lesson. Even the Klingons learn a lesson that not everyone in the Empire is towing the party line. They've got a bit of housekeeping to do themselves. And that peace might actually be a better way, because in some ways Starfleet is just as dangerous as them. And on a side note, Starfleet, the supposedly non-military agency, in this film you see they have Marines aboard ships. Now I know that Starfleet Marines are technically a thing, they are canon in universe, you just never really see them, except odd times, and you do see them in this film. There were a few of them aboard the Enterprise. And you've got officers who have the rank of colonel. That's not a naval rank, that's a military rank. Now they'd supposedly disbanded the Mako, so what was he colonel in? Must have been the Starfleet Marines. Side note, always bothered me. I know canonically Starfleet has Marines, not just security personnel. It's a very, very, very small agency, a very, very small division of Starfleet that's often forgotten about in televisions, in the televised series, and even in the other movies. But there we have it, the basic plot of Star Trek VI, a film that is not only underrated but is phenomenally well made, and it's so fun to watch. It's an exciting film, and that brings me, via a nice non-segue, it just brings me to it, my nerd score I give this film, and it is the full fanfare of 6 nerds, if nerds are a thing I can give in 6s, and they are, because I say they are, so they are. And it gets 6 of them because it's as good as Star Trek The Wrath of Khan. And Wrath of Khan is a fucking good film. It is the one that appeals to everyone. It's not just the Star Treks. It's not just the Trekkies film, it's an everybody's film. But this film is also a Trekkie film. It's more of the Trekkie movie. And for me, 2 and 6 are the best. The absolute best. And that's a different one for me to say, because I also like Star Trek 4. I even like the motion picture to a degree. But this film is so good, and it's so enjoyable. And as I said, you've got outstanding performances from actors of a caliber that Star Trek doesn't often see, such as Christopher Plummer. And the film is just brilliant. if you've not seen it, I highly recommend you go and watch all the films that came out before it and after it, including it as well. Because all the Star Trek films are worth watching, even the bad ones. Star 5. So there we have it. Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. Maybe the unsung hero of the franchise. It's also, as I said, the last film starring the original series crew as the primary heroes, and not just relegated to a side role like they are in Star Trek Generations. Tell me what you think about this movie in the comments. Have I given it the wrong score? Is it not 6 out of 6? Is it not that good? Is it 5.5? 5 3/4? What is it? Like, share, subscribe, and bye bye.